Hello everyone, hope you're doing great. So in the last chapter, we studied about chapter 9, and that was from Modern India from Bipin Chandra. In that chapter, we mainly focused on the growth of Indian nationalism and how it started, and the nationalist movement from 1858 to 1905. In this chapter, we are going to study about growth of New India, that is the religious and social reform after 1858. Let's start reading and hope you stay till the end of the video and read along with us. Thank you. The rising tide of nationalism and democracy, which led the struggle for freedom, also found expression in the movements to reform and democratize the social institutions and religious outlook of Indian people. Many Indians realized that the social and religious reformation was essential condition for the all-round development of the country on modern lines and for the growth of national unity and solidarity. The growth of nationalist sentiments, emergence of new economic forces, spread of education, impact of modern Western ideas and culture, and increased awareness of the world not only heightened the consciousness of the backwardness and degeneration of Indian society, but further strengthened the resolve to reform. Keshav Chandra Sen, for example, said, "What we see around us today is a nation whose primitive greatness lies buried in ruins. Its national literature and science, its theology and philosophy, its industry and commerce, its social prosperity and domestic simplicity and sweetness are almost numbered with the things that were. As we survey the mournful and the dismal scene of desolation, spiritual, social, and intellectual, which spreads around us, we in vain try to recognize therein the land of Kalidas, the land of poetry, of science, and of civilization." Similarly, Swami Vivekananda described the condition of Indian people in the following words: "Moving about here and there, emaciated figures of young and old in tattered rags, whose faces bear deep cut lines of the despair and poverty of hundreds of years. Cows, bullocks, buffaloes, common everywhere. The same melancholy look in their eyes, the same feeble physique, on the wayside refuse and dirt. This is the present day India. Worn out huts by the very side of the palaces, piles of refuse in the near proximity of temples, and the sannyasin clad with only a little loin cloth, walking by the gorgeously dressed, the pitiful gaze of lustreless eyes of the hunger stricken at the well fed and the amply provided. This is our native land. Devastation by violent plague and cholera, malaria eating into the very vitals of the nation. Starvation and semi starvation as second nature. Death like famine, often dancing its tragic dance. A conglomeration of 300 million souls resembling men only in appearance, crushed out of life by being downtrodden by their own people and foreign nations. Without any hope, without any past, without any future. Of the malicious nature befitting of a slave, to whom the property of their fellow men is unbearable, licking the dust of the feet of the strong, withal dealing a death blow to those who are weak, full of ugly, diabolical superstitions which come naturally to those who are weak and hopeless of the future. Without any standard of morality as their backbone, 300 million of souls such as these are swarming on the body of India, like so many worms or on a rotten, stinking carcass. This is the picture concerning us which naturally presents itself to the English official. Thus, after 1858, the earlier reforming tendency was broadened. The work of earlier reformers like Raja Ram Mohan Roy, Pandit Vidyasagar was carried further by major movements of religious and social reform. Religious reform. Filled with the desire to adapt their society to the requirements of the modern world of science, democracy, and nationalism, and determined to let no obstacle stand in the way, thoughtful Indians set out to reform their traditional religions. For religion was in those times a basic part of people's life, and there could be little social reform without religious reform. While trying to remain true to foundations of their religion, they remodeled them to suit the new needs of the Indian people. The first is Brahmo Samaj. The Brahmo tradition of Raja Ram Mohan Roy was carried forward after 1843 by Devendranath Tagore, who was also repudiated the doctrine that the Vedic scriptures were infallible, and after 1866 by Keshav Chandra Sen. The Brahmo Samaj made an effort to reform Hindu religion by removing abuses and by basing it on the worship of one god and on the teachings of the Vedas and Upanishads, even though it repudiated the doctrine of infallibility of the Vedas. It also tried to incorporate the best aspects of modern Western thought. Most of all, it based itself on the human reason, which was the ultimate criteria for deciding what was worthwhile and what was useless in the past or present religious principles and practices. For that reason, the Brahmo Samaj denied the need for a priestly class for interpreting religious writings. Every individual has the right and the capacity to decide with the help of his own intellect what was right and what was wrong in the religious book or principle. Thus, the Brahmos were basically opposed to the idolatry and superstitious practices and rituals, in fact, to the entire Brahmanical system. They could worship one god without the mediation of the priests. The Brahmos were also great social reformers. They actively opposed the caste system and child marriage and supported the general uplift of women, including widow remarriage and the spread of modern education to men and women. The Brahmo Samaj was weakened by the internal dimensions in the second half of the 19th century. Moreover, its influence was confined mostly to the urban educated groups. Yet, it had a decisive influence on the intellectual, social, cultural, and political life of Bengal and the rest of India in the 19th and 20th centuries. Religious reform in Maharashtra. Religious reform was begun in Bombay in 1840 by the Paramhans Mandali, which aimed at fighting idolatry and caste system. Perhaps the earliest religious reformers in Western India was Gopal Hari Deshmukh, known popularly as Lokhitvadi, who wrote in Marathi, made powerful rationalist attacks on Hindu orthodoxy and preached religious and social equality. For example, he wrote in 1840s, "The priests are very unholy because they repeat things without understanding their meaning and profanely reduce knowledge to such repetition. The Pandits are worse than priests because they are the most ignorant and also are haughty. Who are who are the Brahmins and in what respects do they differ from us? Have they 20 hands or do we lack something in us?" When such questions are now asked, the Brahmins should give up their foolish concepts. They must accept that all men are equal and everybody has the right to acquire knowledge. He also said that if religion did not sanction social reforms, then religion should be changed, for after all, religion was made by human beings, and the scriptures written long ago might not remain relevant to the later times. Later, the Pratna Samaj was started with the aim of reforming Hindu religious thought and practice in the light of modern knowledge. It preached the worship of one god and tried to free religion from caste orthodoxy and priestly domination. Two of the great leaders were R.G. Bhandarkar and the famous Sanskrit scholar and historian and Mahadev Govind Ranade. It was powerfully influenced by the Brahmo Samaj. Its activities also spread to South India as a result of its efforts in the Telugu reformer Vireslingam. One of the greatest rationalist thinkers of the modern India, Gopal Ganesh Agarkar, also lived and worked in Maharashtra at this time. Agarkar was an advocate for power of human reason. He sharply criticized any blind dependence on tradition or false glorification of India's past. Ramakrishna and Vivekanand. Ramakrishna Paramhans, 1834 to 1886, was a saintly person who sought religious salvation in the traditional ways of renunciation, meditation, and devotion, bhakti. In his search for religious truth or the realization of God, he lived with mystics of other faiths, Muslims and Christians. He again and again emphasized that there were many roads to God and salvation, and that service of man was the service of God, for man was the embodiment of God. It was his great disciple Swami Vivekanand from 1863 to 1902 who popularized the religious message and who tried to put it in form that would suit the needs of contemporary Indian society. Above all, Vivekanand stressed that social section, knowledge unaccompanied by action, is the actual world in which we live, was useless. He said. He too, like his guru, proclaimed the essential oneness of all religions and condemned any narrowness in religion matters. Thus, he wrote in 1898, 400 own motherland, a junction of the two great systems, Hinduism and Islam, is the only hope. At the same time, though, it tended to give them a sense of false pride in their past greatness. One of one of Mrs. Besant's many achievements in India was the establishment of the Central Hindu School at Banaras, which was later developed by Madan Mohan Malviya into Banaras Hindu University. Thank you everyone for tuning in. In the next part, we are going to study about the Sayyid Ahmad Khan and the Aligarh School. Stay tuned and all the best for your exams. Thank you everyone.